Hey guys, an episode of Guns I Know, very special episode. I got a new camera. I think it's looking pretty good. Let me know if it looks good or looks bad. I think it looks pretty good. But this is not about this camera. No, this episode is about one thing. These over here, these Galils. Why? Because one of you asked a very important question that I think requires a bit more explanation. Impatient Snake said, hey daskro, I can't reply to your comment, but why so many different models of Galil? Seems unnecessary. Well, I want to talk to you guys a little bit more about the Galil, the history, the mechanics, and other things about that, and why I like it so much. So let's first start off and talk not about the Galil, but about its ancestry. Now, even though the Galil was made in Israel in the 1970s, it goes all the way back to the AK-47 design, the Type 2, Type 3 AK-47 designs of the 1950s, roughly, from the Soviet Union or Russia. You see, when this Type 2 and Type 3 AK-47s were being developed, they eventually were sold, the tooling of the design was sold to Finland. Finland, as a country that had some alliance with the Soviet Union, but it was very, I wouldn't say imbalanced, but it was something that was very delicate at times, to say the least. Finland got the tooling design for the Type 2, Type 3 AK-47, or AK-47 for short, and they improved upon it. They made their own variant called the Valmet RK62, made by Valmet. In the United States, we know them as the Finnish Valmets. For those in Finland, they're the RK62. They were a milled AK receiver with a lot of improvements to it. And it represented sort of a design that still had a lot of the Soviet roots, but had a few upgrades here and there. And when they designed this, they had it for cold winter conditions, and it proved very useful for Finland for many decades. Now, fast forward all the way to the 1970s or late 1960s. Israel was just finishing up with the 67 war. The 67 war, they had fought the Arabs as a coalition, and in this fighting, they were using the FNFAL. They found that the FNFAL, despite being a pretty good battle rifle, had problems working in those harsh Arab environments. The fine Arab sand would often make the gun jam, and it caused a lot of problems. They needed to have something different. In addition to this, they also sort of adopted what was now becoming more and more popular at the time, the idea of incorporating assault rifles as opposed to battle rifles. Assault rifles are chambered in intermediate caliber cartridges, which are really for ranges up to 300 meters. And they found that in these battles, 300 meters was really what the most they were going to be engaging in. Because of this, they wanted to create a new assault rifle for Israel. They wanted something different than the FNFAL, and they had a competition. There were really two different dominant designs that made it into the competition, one of which was by Uze Gal, another one was by Yisrael Galil and Yaakov Leo. I'm butchering those names. I can't speak Hebrew, so forgive me on that one. These two designs were brought into competition, and the Yisrael Galil's design won over. Now, for those that didn't quite catch the other guy that I mentioned, Uze Gal. Uze Gal was the guy who made the Uzi. Uzi's named after him because he had made the Uzi, which was at the time a submachine gun using an open bolt, straight blowback system. And so these were really two predominant firearms designers. Now, Yisrael Galil didn't make his own design. What he ended up doing was he went to Finland and was able to get the rights to make his own version of the RK62 with his own changes and improvements to it in order to make it work. As the competition ran its course, the Galil design won over and it began going into production. Now, it was supposed to go into service by the IDF in the early 1970s, but the 1972 Yom Kippur War happened and they had to make do with what they had available. And so the Galil was actually delayed several years from its original date of when it was going to be adopted. But as the 70s progressed, the Israeli government and the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, ended up using the Galil in several variants of it. We have the Galil SAR, as I mentioned before. We have the Galil ARM, which is a light machine gun model that has, it's nearly identical to this Galil over here, except it comes with a much larger magazine, 50-round magazine. It comes with a carry handle, a bipod, and beyond that, it's pretty much identical in terms of receiver and barrel. Barrel length's a bit different, but the barrel size is about the same caliber, that kind of thing. And came with a number of other variants out there as well. There were Galil sniper variants called the Galil galils. They had really micro variants like the Galil MAR. They had ones chambered in various calibers, 7.62 by 51 NATO, for instance, 30 caliber carbine for the Galil MAR. Well, actually, that's not right. It's the Galil Ace. No, it's the Magal. Excuse me. I'm looking at my notes here. And all these different variants they made, it was for different types of roles out there. They wanted to have a gun that could fill different roles and could be flexible enough to be usable. As the 1980s came into fruition, the Lebanon Civil War took place, and we really first saw the Galil to be used in combat in that conflict. And it turned out to be a very effective weapon. But as that conflict progressed, the IDF went through a bunch of changes. Amongst other things, the IDS started adopting the M16, or the AR-15 variant of assault rifles that the U.S. Armed Forces uses en masse. They did this because they received a huge surplus of M16 rifles from the U.S. government. Now, they did this, they adopted the M16 because it was really too good of a deal to pass up. They could individually make these Galils on their own, or alternatively, they could get, no kidding, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of surplus M16s, and as well as all the parts and spares that they would need to equip their entire armed forces. And so as these M16s came flooding the market, the Galil was relegated to the reserve units. It really only had a life of maybe 15 years or so, but it's still actually even used today in some reserve units in the Israeli forces, but is also used by a bunch of other countries. Here's a list of them. It's a pretty cool list, I think, of a lot of varied characters in there. Wow. The Galil, though, was made by IMI, which is sort of a state-owned industry. It means that it's not like a private corporation. It's like what ISMASH was during the Soviet Union. It's owned by the government, operated by the government. IMI is responsible for a lot of other guns that you may be aware of, like the Uzi or the Micro Uzi or the Mini Uzi, the Desert Eagle, for instance, the Tavor or the MTAR, a lot of different firearms out there that are very well known. And of those, a bunch of them actually came to the United States in the 80s and 90s. So the Israeli government had no problem selling to anyone and everyone, be it the United States or South Africa or even Colombia. They produced maybe 2,500 of these Galils a month during peak periods in the 1980s. Now, for perspective, what does that mean? Well, around the same time, if you were to look at the number of AK-74s being put out a month by the various Russian factories, they were doing about 100,000 AK-74s a month. Contrast that again with the U.S., with Colt, they were doing maybe 1,000 a month, maybe. And this goes back to this idea of surplus M16s in the first place. They had made so many M16s during the Vietnam era and a little bit after that there wasn't that big of a need to buy more guns, at least from the U.S. perspective. Anyway, let's take a look at some of Galil shooting right now. As we watch all these shooting clips, and I think a lot of them are really cool, my friends are shooting them too, and you'll see in a few minutes them shooting as well. Let's talk about how the Galils got in the United States. Well, first and foremost, as I mentioned before, Israel was importing them in the 1980s in various makes and models. These are known as sort of pre-ban Galils, pre-89, 1989 Galils. They were imported in by a number of third-party importers. They imported by the Israeli government itself. The U.S. market is a good market to sell rifles to. There's a big demand, and so if you can, they're making 2,500 a month, and in this case, 50% of their rifles were going to civilian markets. It was a pretty good way of supplementing that indigenous demand. In addition, when the 1989 imported rifle ban took place, a number of Galils also made it to the market, either as sporting models or simply as parts kits. In the 1990s, Mossberg, for instance, maker of the Mossberg 500, was imported in a bunch of Galil parts and ended up selling them. For about 15 years or so, there was only a few companies that had Galil parts, and they sold them for a lot of money, to say the least. Recently, though, a number of Galil parts have come in, both from Israel, but also from third-party countries, like, for instance, South Africa or Colombia. They come in as parts kits, and they were built by various builders out there that could manufacture them in overseas and produce them and sell them. Century made a bunch of the Galil ARs, which I don't own one, but they're very prolific, to say the least. And they were for a pretty good price, too. Because of this sort of new golden era of Galil, there's a lot of opportunity to buy all these variants. There's a number of Galil variants that we likely will not see in the future in that much. I think Galil Galils, a Galil sniper rifle, there's only a few hundred in the United States, for instance. Or perhaps the newer variants, the Galil Ace or the Galil Magal, for instance. These are Galils that are much newer in nature, maybe more difficult to get in the United States. But they always could come in the United States. We're seeing the Tavor come in, which is the new IMI, MTAR 21, that's going to be sold in the U.S. as well. Pretty cool stuff. Let's go into why I think there's a lot of cool features with the Galil. So when we look at the Galil, there's a number of things that kind of catch my attention. First and foremost, the Galil has they have a folding stock, and that's really cool. It has all these sort of neat features. So let me show you a feature, for instance. So this is a bundle of wire. This is just solid copper wire, but let's pretend, for instance, it was steel wire. I'm just going to unroll it a bit and move it around. Oh, try it again. And let's pretend this is not going to work, is it? Let's pretend this is a gate that I want to break into. Yeah, this is going to work. Maybe. The Galil ARM has, check this out, guys, it has a wire cutter. And so if I just get this in here, this is not going to work. I'm going to put this wire in. There it is. It's in here, guys. And I'm going to push it forward. Are you ready for this? Ready for this? Bam! Oh. Oh, no. Yeah, I cut it. Right, guys? Yeah, cut it. And let's talk about what else it can do. It can also be a bottle opener. How does that work? Well, I'm going to put this on its side here, and I'm going to then put the bottle cap here on the sides, and I'm going to line it up. I've actually never done this before because I don't really, I have regular bottle openers, but you always hear about this. And here we go. I feel like it's going. And there you go. Oh, I spilled all over myself. Shit. Anyway, yeah, it did it, and I got beer all over my. I don't know how they do it. Maybe like they do it like this, and they go wham. Now I got to clean myself up. So I think that about covers it for the Galil. I know this is a lot of information to take in, but it's sort of the things that make it more interesting to collect. All these different factoids and aspects of the gun that really make it very different compared to a lot of other guns out there. So many different variants, so much history involved in it. And I think it's also pretty cool the fact that you're talking about a derivative of a Soviet assault rifle that is chambered in a NATO caliber cartridge. That's pretty cool, I think. It's sort of this amalgamation of two warring sides and the result of all their technology, and at least at the time in the small arms world. Really cool stuff. Anyway, let's go into your questions. Enough about Galils. First question, Mandolin says, how much total did it cost to convert that SL8 in regards to my G36 video? SL8s cost a decent amount of money to convert, anywhere from $1,800 to $2,000, depending on the availability of parts and who you're going through. It varies. Let's go to Sniper Fox. Sniper Fox says, and this is actually a correction, and I want to thank Sniper Fox for making this comment. This is a correction to my G36 video. He says, still no bolt release, not standard on the G36. I had a real-life G36 from the German Army in my hands, the military version, and it's just like my Airsoft G36, it doesn't have that manual bolt catch. Well, I did a little more investigation. It turns out that he's right. the very early variants of G36s that came into fruition and were fielded by the Bundeswehr did not have that bolt open, like I mentioned. Now, the later variants certainly did, and the export models did, but not the earlier ones. And so, in theory, DICE probably got it about 100% right, depending on what variant they were using. So, a little bit of correction there, but thank you for the corrections. It was actually very insightful to look into. Nathaniel Lyer says, how the fuck can you have so much guns at home? Where are you from? It's not that I dislike you, but I wouldn't want my neighbors to be heavily armed like that. I can have all these guns in my home because it's perfectly legal. There's no restriction in America of how many guns you can and can't own, or how much ammunition you can and can't have, or anything along those lines. And furthermore, philosophically, does it make it more dangerous if you have 5 guns versus 50 guns? I mean, real life is not like the game Quake or the game or some of the earlier games out there where you could carry a bunch of guns on your back and you could just equip each one like crazy. It doesn't work like that. There's a saying out there which says, fear not the man that has a dozen guns, but the one with just one. Because with that man with the one gun, it means that he's proficient in that one gun. He knows how to use it. And proficiency goes a whole lot more in terms of being able to utilize a given weapon than how much accessories you have on it or how much money you've put into it. It's just like basketball, it's just like golf, it's just like any other sport out there. It doesn't matter if you have some really expensive basketball shoes or some really expensive golf clubs. They're not going to help you that much in actually being able to play the sport if you don't practice, if you're not proficient in the sport. So that's my sort of response to that. Let's go to 123 Superbad 97. Hey daskro, love your clips, pun intended. In BF3 and most FBF games, the way the character reloads most guns, he simply pulls out the mag and puts a new one in without doing any action to secure it, unless there's no bullet in the chamber. Is this true in real life, where you can take the mag out without unlocking anything and then put a new one in without securing it? Also, are there tricks or shortcuts you can take with reloading some weapons? Well, to answer this question, 123 Superbad 97, most games get it right. Some games intentionally make it look longer, more difficult, like a G36 as an example, because they want to spice it up in terms of it being interesting. But beyond this, most games get it right. You put the magazine in, you cycle the bolt, you fire, it reloads the next round. Some guns have bolt hold open, some don't, and that's the end of it. And there's really no tricks or shortcuts to it. There are faster ways of doing it, but a lot has to do with your fine motor skills and being able to reliably reload the gun and operate the gun under duress. Alan Bank says, what would the best first handgun to buy? Well, the best first handgun to buy is something that I can't speak to exactly, but what I would say is I, for one, have a lot of regret in my first handgun purchase because it was not what I should have bought. I'm not going to say what my first handgun was that I did buy, but I wish I would have bought a 22 caliber semi-automatic. And I would have purchased that, and there's a lot of ones out there, and put a lot of rounds through it. Talking about 5,000-10,000 rounds through it, because I think I would be a whole lot better shot with a handgun if I would have done that. I would have got my trigger discipline a whole lot better. I would have got my aiming a whole lot better. I would have been able to control the recoil more. That's my take on it. You want to start small and work your way up. That's one of my biggest regrets, so don't make the same mistake I did. Uncle Asian Gaming says, you like and use real guns, so do you find different guns in Battlefield 3 fun to use? The guns are balanced out, so they're not realistic at all. You can't say you would know how a gun is by playing Battlefield. So I don't understand why people complain when a YouTuber just uses a few weapons, or why they think different guns are exciting. To me, they're just tools. I'm not really interested in guns at all in real life, so maybe that's why. But I'm curious to know what a gun freak like you thinks. I don't consider myself a gun freak, but I will say that I do view them like tools in the game. I really don't. I don't get much enjoyment out of playing a variety of different guns in a given game, because my objective in the game isn't to shoot a bunch of guns. My objective in the game is to win the game. And it could be shooting guns or casting spells or shooting lasers. I don't really care. I don't really care about that. I want to play. I want to play one of the game. I want to challenge myself against proficient and competent opponents. In real life, I'm about gun collecting, about trying out these new guns and having fun with them. I'm not. And then on the shooting sports side, I'm not going to be using a different variety of guns because I think it would be fun. I want to try to win and get the best time that I can get. And in that same respect, it's two separate things. One's on gun collecting and enjoying shooting generally, and one's on the competition side. So two different things. Hey Zada says, out of all the games to choose with, how unrealistic are the guns in the game, you choose Black Ops. A game set 13 years in the future and is basically an arcade-style game that isn't supposed to be realistic. So I actually replied to this, and I said, I do not choose guns in real life. I choose games with guns I have access to. I choose Black Ops 2 because it had FAL. Not many new games have FALs. Battlefield 3 doesn't have an FAL, and Armor 2's visual detail doesn't really interest me. I don't think Far Cry 3 will have an FAL, and Armor 3 is still far a ways off. I just want to talk about this a bit more, that this is more just showing guns that we see in games with their real-life counterparts. And further, even though Black Ops 2 is 13 years in the future, the fact of the matter is that most guns don't change design that much, especially if they have the same make and model and they look nearly identical to it. So the FNFAL, the DSA SA-58 that we saw in that video, isn't going to change 15 years from now, or whatever it may be, especially if it's the same make and model. So that's not an argument. And then finally, I got one more question. On this same topic, Luke New 3 says, your argument is invalid unless you have a FAL OSW from the future. Again, the guns don't change that much from one generation to the next. There's no black matter or dark matter that is powering the guns of the future. Unless we're talking about lasers or something else like that that's completely doesn't even exist right now. So unless these guns are shooting bolts of lightning or something, I think it's fair to compare them. So anyway, though, that's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed the Galil footage. I certainly did. If you liked it and you want to see more of it, please let me know. And send in your questions as always. I'll see you guys later.